is not necessarily inadequate. New is not necessarily better. I found this quote, and I'm not sure who said it, but it has guided me subconsciously through my life, through many of my years. I feel like working with cattle producers and older farmers, I found a lot of their old ways were well-founded, sensible, and highly practical to accomplish goals. I learned a lot from this. Where I find I am frustrated is when I try to take my new education and combine it with the old to improve and modernize where necessary. People a lot of times just don't want to follow me. They only want the old. I would add to the quote, old is not necessarily inadequate, new is not necessarily better, but neither may be adequate for the current world. We know more now than we did 100 years ago. It doesn't mean that what we did 100 years ago was wrong, but we can evaluate and update to adapt to our current situation. Welcome to Vet Talk, the veterinary podcast. I'm Dr. Nathan, and today I want to talk about food diseases and disturbing trends I see which concern me about our food safety. We're going to talk about big government, big industry, and then specific diseases, and how I'm concerned about keeping our food safe. First, it gets really complicated who protects what food. But most of our meat and poultry are inspected and protected by the USDA through the Food and Safety Inspection Service. How did they get their power? Well, Congress started passing laws when food left the local level and started to be mass-produced for sale all across the country and world. Quality control of beef is why most of this started. And America had and has a lot of cows. So we could supply not only local sourcing, but other parts of the world with the amount of meat we could produce. So the first federal meat inspection law in the U.S. was passed in 1890 and was intended to protect foreign trade in meat and meat products. After all, it's about the money. If people won't buy our products because they are substandard, how can we make money? This law did not provide for post-mortem exam at the time of slaughter. It did require for inspection of products when the buyer or seller requested it. This law failed, as did subsequent laws in 1891 and 1895. Then enter Roosevelt. Roosevelts know how to get things done. Teddy in this case. He was a big proponent of better meat due to both the politics of the time and the embalmed beef scandal of the Spanish-American War. This was where he was being fed, as a soldier, embalmed beef, or rotting meat preserved with formaldehyde. That doesn't sound too tasty. At the same time, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle came out. While this book was mostly about social problems, 12 of the 308 pages dealt with gruesome processing of meat in the Chicago stockyards. I read the book for school, and that's all I remember from it, the stuff with the meat industry. It talks about grinding up poisoned rats, hogs that had died of cholera being used to feed people, selling to market cattle with tuberculosis, and also about people falling into vats and being processed for human consumption. While this was a book, the Reynolds-Neal report, which was commissioned by Roosevelt, determined much of what the book said was true. People didn't like this when they realized what poor quality of food they were getting, so they complained. In 1906, the Meat Inspection Act was passed, where the government started inspecting each animal that was processed before death and after death. If the meat or animal was bad, it was not put in for consumption by people. The plants that processed the food that were made had to be approved by the government to make sure that the plant had adequate facilities and food processing flowed in a healthy manner. Then during processing, the food was also re-inspected. And not just that, the food had to be labeled correctly so you knew what you were going to be getting at the store. The Federal Poultry Inspection Act of 1957 extended that same inspections to poultry. So, it's just hard for me sometimes. Our congressmen didn't think that beef and poultry needed to be protected. It took our congressmen 51 years to realize we should protect not just our steak dinner, but our chicken sandwich. This doesn't help me think that Congress is or has ever been the brightest or most caring group of people. However, one of the things that happens is with the institutions they create, they hire people and give them the ability to use their skills to create a process that does protect us. While my faith in congressmen is limited, the institutions created hire people whose goal is to serve people, and they take pride in their work, which results in better care and standards. Moving forward, the Wholesome Meat Act of 1967 tightened up regulation, as well as making sure meat that comes into the country was also well inspected. And all this is important. We have to remember, as much as we may think the government is not on our side, it is, or at least should be, with our health, especially when the people demand protection. But who isn't on our side is big business. Big business wants to make as much money as possible. We know this even today. The average person complains of prices at the store, yet the local Kroger's seems to be raking in cash. Rich corporate people are still bringing in excess profits while everyone else is struggling. Here's looking at you, Musk and Bezos. When big business is trying to make money, they will always ask where they can save and cut corners. Without the government inspecting and guaranteeing food quality, holding big business to a standard, then big business is going to start cutting and saving money at our expense. Teddy Roosevelt didn't like getting rotting meat in formaldehyde. Neither would I. But there was a time when it didn't bother companies to sell that to people, as long as they made money. And I don't want to test to see if they would do it again today. Looking more local, a local producer hopefully wouldn't sell bad meat. When the meat came from your own farm or your friend down the street, the quality would hopefully be controlled by peer pressure and your own high standards. But as the world grows, not everyone can grow their own cows, so big business likes to feed people and make money from it. But big business must be regulated or we get rotting meat. Because who can hold a big business accountable? Well, it takes someone just as big, like our government. One of the other things I'm concerned about is the knowledge of the individual. Do they know all the diseases they are looking for to know that meat is bad and to keep that meat out of the food chain? At a personal level, you can take whatever risk you want. If I want to go eat a raw pig, I can. I may get sick from it, but I can do that. On the flip side, I'm not allowed to sell raw pig meat to someone else. I might make them sick through negligence or ignorance and profit from it. We have decided as a society that's wrong. What I see locally is a lot of people are frustrated with all the rules and regulations around food because they want to sell their products. I like locally produced and sourced food, and am appreciative of the very industrious people that do that work. But they have to take responsibility of protecting their consumers. And I just don't know that people always want to do that or that they have the knowledge to do that. That's a lot of work. For example, during COVID, many local business owners did not enforce mask mandates. I walk into a store and I see they are not taking simple steps to decrease transmission of a potentially deadly disease to me, their customer. All it would take is wearing a mask. I put a mask on all the time to prevent disease transmission to all my surgery cases. When local producers slaughter their food or get milk to sell, do they have all the proper sanitation methods in their facilities? Have they been trained to look for if there is a sickness in the animals they're slaughtering or milking? Sure, if they cook a meal and I eat the meal as a guest at their house, I take a certain risk upon myself. But if they sell produce, they are profiting and I have to watch out for the consumer. But are they any different from big business? They won't wear masks, so do they take that extra step to make sure the food isn't contaminated with feces? I want more local food. And thankfully there are different levels of inspection the further food goes from home. And I think that is important for the consumer and society. The more people it affects, the more regulated it should be. And locally, I don't want so much regulation that people can't produce and sell animals. But I also don't want to sacrifice safety for that. For example, around here, and from all my training, I don't know if I like this. People around here sell their cows as freezer beef. It's basically skirting the inspection laws, in my opinion. If you raise a cow and have it butchered, you can eat that meat. But you can't sell it. So what people do is sell the live cow to the person. Then the seller handles going to the local processor and then gives the meat directly to the buyer. The meat isn't inspected and is labeled not for sale. The person technically bought the live cow, but they're getting a bunch of beef. Again, you see where I'm a little concerned about this? It's legal, but it's a loophole. Because theoretically, it's the owner's cow going directly to the owner. It's totally legal. You can do what you want and take the risk upon yourselves with the food you eat. But you can't sell that. Now, I know people do sell that. And I know people will kill their cows and just sell beef to people, not the whole cow. As long as people know what they are getting, that's fine. But sometimes I think the law is skirted a little too much. And well, I'm the one treating cows. These aren't all healthy animals. Like, I had a cattle client that told me he thought cattle only need to be dewormed every 7 years. Whoever got the beef from that producer, I hope it was cooked properly. That being said, every other year my family buys a cow from my neighbor and stocks our freezer. I see his work, I trust the beef that he's giving me. And I cook it properly. Or my wife cooks it properly. I just always wonder a little if a little more inspections could benefit the community from a local level to adding foods to the market like venison. I get frustrated. We have so many hunters around here. I would love to see the deer meat sold. But again, getting that inspected is challenging. We would need to have more government centers to inspect the food and more inspectors. And that gets challenging financially. I remember at church we did a food outreach. A concerned citizen donated canned food. I eat the canned food from that citizen all the time. But because it wasn't processed at an approved center, the church couldn't use the food because of the public health risk that the food was not properly processed. Anyway, all this is to say I want safe food and I want more options to get more safe food out to people. I'd love to see more local produce go locally. And this does happen, but I think it could happen more. We just need more inspection methods, which, like I said, costs money, and is that money we have. Now, of course, there are exemptions to some of the inspections for smaller processors, so you can get food out locally. If you sell up to 250 turkeys or 1,000 chickens, you can sell uninspected birds as the farmer. Small processors up to 5,000 turkeys or 20,000 chickens must pass sanitation standards, but don't have to have individual birds inspected. This can be sold locally, but can't be sold federally, or basically can't cross state lines. And then, when you get even bigger, it's more complicated because, as I said, the further the food goes, the further away from the people who can hold the food producers accountable, and the more the government holds people accountable. And the more the government holds people or big business accountable. On a side note, in the 1958 humane slaughter, we started regulating how animals were to be humanely processed. They can be euthanized by captive bolt, guns, electrostunning, carbon dioxide, and kosher slaughter, which is on the ritualistic side of things for making sure our Jewish friends can get their food properly prepared. So not only are we treating people better, but we are treating animals better in the process. I'm not saying improvement on all we've just talked about can't be made, but we have definitely been heading in the right direction. But hey, let's take a look at what's out there. What are we worried about getting, or what are we trying to prevent people from getting with all these laws? So broadly, what we're talking about is pathogens, or what causes disease. So let's talk about what pathogens' goal are, because our goal is not being infected by a disease. Pathogens, on the other hand, their goal is to avoid the immune system, exit the diseased host, and find a new susceptible host. Pathogens cause disease, but the goal of a smart pathogen is to move to balance where both pathogen and host survive. Think about it. If the pathogens kill us, they don't have a good chance of spreading. So the oldest and smartest diseases affect the host as little as possible. What we are concerned with is when diseases are young and dumb and trying to figure out how to spread. COVID is less of a problem now because when it was young, it was killing people. As it ages, not discounting its deadliness, but symptoms are generally milder. The second time I caught COVID, I recovered much quicker. So what are these diseases causing us problems? First, let's talk about diseases we can get from drinking milk. What are the results of all these potential diseases on our health in the country? Milk-borne disease causes 761 illnesses and 22 hospitalizations a year. Most of these are from Salmonella and Campylobacter. Only about 3.2% of the U.S. consumes raw milk, but these people are 838 times more likely to get an illness and 45 times more likely to become hospitalized. So why is this such a big deal? I mean, those are small numbers. Well, that's only 3.2% of the population we're looking at. So those numbers should be low. We have been living in a country where people haven't seen the bad side effects of raw milk. But before pasteurization, infant mortality rates were 30 to 60 times higher than they were now. And we saw more serious diseases back then, like tuberculosis and brucellosis infecting people. And culture, with society forgetting about the problems raw milk caused in the past, is swinging back to wanting to drink raw milk. People think natural is always the best, which I just disagree with, since when I stub my toe, I want to take an Advil. But people think raw milk has more beneficial bacteria and is more digestible than other milks. And they also think it has more vitamins and enzymes that are beneficial. I'm not going to argue that right now, but it's a pro and con of risk. Would you want milk that was theoretically, and I'm making this number up, but theoretically 20% less beneficial to you, but 99% guaranteed not to give you bloody diarrhea? I bet statisticians hate me, but here, 3.2% of the population doesn't drink raw milk. So if everyone did that, a 96.8% increase would be about 73,000 cases of milk-borne illness in the U.S. That number would be much more significant. Anyway, I think raw milk consumption is trendy now, both because we haven't seen the disease and people are thinking there are more health benefits from drinking raw milk than the downsides of potentially getting infected by the diseases raw milk can carry. And what diseases will we see? Probably bacterial problems. 90% of the foodborne problems in the country come from bacteria. So what are some of the bacteria that we see in milk? Listeria, that's one of them. It incubates for 12 hours and can cause nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, loss of balance, and could lead to more serious problems like meningitis or abortions. This can last from several hours to several weeks before the person recovers. Two other bacteria, Salmonella and E. coli. Symptoms of those include a lot of GI signs such as diarrhea, fever, stomach cramps, and vomiting. Salmonella infection is usually mild, but depending on the strain of E. coli, the symptoms can be much more severe and could lead to kidney failure or death. These infections usually occur a few days after an exposure and can go on for a whole week. Campylobacter is another disease which can cause bloody diarrhea, cramping, abdominal pain, fever, nausea, and vomiting. This disease typically lasts a week, but some people can develop arthritic or nerve problems from this. A little bit more severe of a disease, Q fever, caused by Coxiella burnetii, primarily comes from raw milk. Fever persists 1 to 3 weeks. You get severe headaches, chills, malaise, myalgia, and chest pain. I'm going to talk about pasteurization in just a bit, but pasteurization times are based on killing this organism, Coxiella burnetii. Another disease, brucella, is an organism that could be in milk, and it can cause fever and joint pain. And more recently, there are concerns about bird flu being found in raw milk. While this hasn't resulted in any known cases of human infection, it is a concern to find in the milk. And I wouldn't want to be the first infection if things change. And I think I just saw an article where maybe some kittens were infected with some raw milk that had and received influenza. But don't hold me to that one. But again, it's out there, and it could be in milk. So how do we prevent us from getting these diseases from milk? Pasteurization. Pasteurization is the best prevention we have to these problems. This is the process of heating every particle of milk in properly designed and operated equipment to one of the temperatures in the time temperature chart and holding them continuously at or above that temperature for at least the corresponding specified time. Pasteurization is not sterilization, so the product must be refrigerated. There are still live bacteria in milk. There are a few types of pasteurization. One is long time holding. That is where you hold milk at a temperature of 145 degrees for 30 minutes, or high temperature short time, which is 161 degrees for 15 seconds. There's also ultra pasteurization of milk, where the milk is heated to 280 degrees for at least 2 seconds. That product actually will be sterile and may not require refrigeration. Our objectives with pasteurization is to destroy pathogenic microorganisms and enhance shelf life of the product. Basically destroy some of the spoilage bacteria. This will inactivate some of the milk enzymes, but certain bacteria are still found in the milk. So it's not like it destroys everything, but it does prevent those diseases we mentioned above. There are other steps we can do to prevent those diseases. First, don't drink raw milk. I remember I was at a local event once, and this person was guiding a cow around and selling raw milk fresh from the udder. I remember some of my friends bought and drank the milk, and I was just sitting there thinking of all the diseases they could get. They didn't, to my knowledge, but still, do you just go around taking random milk from something's udder? One of the things I learned about is that E. coli likes spreading through poop. One of the things I learned as a vet, and probably every parent can back me up on this, is poop is everywhere. Needless to say, the raw milk that was being sold, I didn't drink, and was quite happy with my decision, because I looked at the cow and I said to myself, there might be poop on that udder. But other ways to prevent problems with dairy products, and specifically preventing E. coli from being a problem, is never thaw food and let it sit out for longer than 2 hours. Maximum refrigerator storage of ground meat and patties should only be 1 to 2 days. You must cook it thoroughly. E. coli can survive both refrigerator and freezer temperatures. Primarily, we see E. coli in meat, but unpasteurized milk and contaminated water also have it. 92% of E. coli infections are associated with poor hygiene of food handlers. So speaking of meat, let's segue to diseases that we can get from meats. Salmonella is on meats as well, and also in eggs. And with salmonella, quantity matters. The more you ingest, the worse it is. Salmonella is why we refrigerate chicken meat. There's also staphylococcus diseases, which can cause nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, and intestinal cramps. You tend to see this in poultry, meats, salads, and cream fillings, and ham. And the thing is, food usually looks and tastes normal with staph diseases. So you have to be careful with proper preparation. Proper preparation involves storing food less than 40 degrees or higher than 140 degrees. And when you're cooking, staph bacteria are destroyed at 170 degrees for at least 20 minutes. But there are other things besides bacteria. For example, you have parasites. So many parasites. So first, tapeworms. Tapeworms get into the meats of many animals, and if ingested, can go all over the place in the body, causing problems. There's Taenia saginata tapeworm and Taenia solium. That causes neurocysticercosis, i.e. brain problems. Or sometimes that, instead of going into the brain, the tapeworm goes into the eye. Most worms don't end up in the brain or the eye, because that hurts the host and isolates them. And then they wouldn't make it to another host. So why would they want to do that? But sometimes they get lost. I mean, it's just a worm. It's not the smartest creature on the planet. They should go to the gut. But when they're in the gut, that means they're pooped out. And if a person has it, that means people are pooping out tapeworm eggs, and it can spread. Same with animals. When they get to the gut, they poop out the eggs, and it spreads in the feces. But if you are getting meat directly from the farm, you are missing some of the inspections. So cooking is very important. When pigs and cattle eat tapeworm eggs, those eggs hatch in the animal's intestines, and then they will sometimes go through the intestines and then go to the various meat parts of the body. Forms a cysticercus there, and when inspected, makes the pork measly pork or measly beef. This meat is then thrown out if it's found on inspection. On my end, with the live cow, my deworming helps limit this. So my question is, since I know most of my cattle clients may not be deworming properly, does the butcher know to look for this meat and take it out? Another parasite, flukes, if that's noted in an organ, that entire organ gets thrown out when inspected. Moving on, another one is we have trichinella. That's a roundworm which can cause bleeding from the fingernails if you eat it. So let's cook that one out. Inspectors check for tons of things, but proper food care is also needed. Trichinosis, I just mentioned, isn't readily detectable at inspection, so pork must be heated to 131 degrees to kill this. And typically we recommend a margin of safety requiring temperatures for pork to get up to 170 degrees. And some people think, well, maybe we'll freeze it. Freezing at -40 for 20 days will kill this, but most home freezers do not cool to that low of a temperature. And if you're thinking about salting and drying to kill trichinella, that's not very reliable. So a few other random foodborne pathogens. We have Clostridium botulinum. That can be found in honey, and the risk comes when it's used in baby formula because it can germinate in the intestines of babies and cause problems. Clostridium species are anaerobic, so they like growing in canned food. And canning time is 250 degrees for 20 minutes to kill this. So what's our summary for how we protect ourselves from foodborne diseases? Well, the first line of protection is how we prepare foods en masse. That's at the big business and the government level. When we have large corporations, there are more animals and more chance for diseases, so proper regulations are important. But as always, we have to take steps to protect ourselves, and the best way we can prevent disease is through proper and thorough cooking at home. A few other tidbits are if hot foods are out, should be at 140 degrees or higher, or cool foods should be cooled if left out for 2 hours. In general, keep your hot foods hot and your cold foods cold. Depending on the type of food they are, don't let them go between 40 and 140 degrees for longer than 4 hours. After all this discussion, what are some of the things that are concerning me? First, right now I'm afraid that the people being put in charge don't understand how important it is to protect the food supply, because so many of them haven't lived in a world where the food supply was at risk. I was born in the 80s. We seem to have food protected by then. You would think our current leaders, born in the 40s and 50s, may remember some of the problems that come with low government control. But brainworms do have effects on your memory, I guess. So there's a big push to be more natural, which is not bad. Do we need more chemicals floating around in our body? Or do the chemicals outweigh the risk because they keep the food healthy so we have a stable food supply? There are pros and cons to everything, some of which are quite life-altering, some of which deserve discussion or reevaluation of standards. And at the time I'm writing this episode, I'm not sure how that's going to play out with our government. But the people being put in charge remind me of big business. As I said, I don't trust big business to do the right thing. The people being put in charge question things, but they question without reason and training. and seem to latch onto theories that don't hold scientific traction, but then want to dress those theories up as legitimate. We have more knowledge now than we did at any time in the past, so maybe we do need to reevaluate some standards. I'm not against looking at seeing if all the chemicals we pump into our foods and the levels or numbers of those could be reevaluated. But I wonder if this is all a publicity stunt to prey on people's emotions, because people have strong emotional reactions to chemicals, and rightly so, because we don't want too many chemicals being pumped into us, especially if they're doing more harm than good. But I remember with Fox News when I was in college, I'd listen to their segments, and it always seemed like the headline of the story made sense, but then the rest didn't. When I researched the stories, I typically found they were inaccurate, with only the first statements being hard facts. It was enough to kind of bring you in. Well, point A makes sense, point B is biased, point C doesn't make sense, but if they sold you on the first two, you're fine with the last. I want to make it safer and better for local foods to be used, and more chemicals are bad, but are the chemicals we're using really that bad? I'm writing this in 2024. I just saw where RFK wants to get rid of the polio vaccine. He starts with, I want to make vaccines safe for everyone and let them choose what they want. So point A makes sense. We want safe vaccines. Point B is biased. Some vaccines we shouldn't have a choice. That's a bigger conversation. But I'll go to rabies in dogs and certain human vaccines for children that will be with other children. Point C, get rid of the polio vaccine? I haven't dug deep into that one, but I've dug deep into other RFK claims, and I keep finding the claims were not legitimate. This concerns me. Even if RFK Jr. is not put in charge of the Health and Human Services, Trump will likely put someone with the same mindset there. It's an extremism of emotion. There are bad things in the world. They were noted around this specific time, and that's when vaccines came out. It must be the vaccines causing the problem. That line of thinking is too simplified. But that's what's being presented to me in multiple subjects by leaders, and I don't find that acceptable. I want deeper, more critical thinking. One of the things I'm trying to do in this Trump reign is just get information out there so people can think things through and start to question these policymakers. The fight is not letting America become mediocre. We want to strive for going above and beyond. That's what makes America great. When we just want to do a better job than everyone else because of our pride in our job. With the Trump administration, I feel they always want to take an easy way out. And that has given a permission structure for the average citizen to take an easy way out. I see it in the exam room all the time. Doc, you just said my animal has a non-curable disease. But this other guy says if you give it a sugar pill, it'll be fine. I'm going to listen to him. It's easier. I don't have to confront the true problem. These things are complicated, and we deserve complicated answers. And maybe Trump's leaders will surround themselves with people who can give complicated answers to complicated questions. And maybe they will take good advice. It's just so often I see people not listen to smart people with good advice. As veterinarians, we were trained in, and one of our jobs is food safety. While I typically work on keeping the animals safe before they go into processing for our food, I wanted to go over some of the basics about food safety and the history of it so when changes are made, we know how it could affect us. I hope this helps you in your day-to-day life with what you eat, knowing how it gets to the table and knowing some of the diseases you are evading through proper cooking and regulation enforcement. I know I've developed a bias against the Trump reign. I've reached a point in my life where I will fight against extremism. I'm past the wait and see. I'm going to oppose this because of all the problems I've seen in the past. I hope this information helps sway you to a correct mindset even with the biases I have. How I see my fellow countrymen being affected with the character of the decision making at the top levels of this country concerns my veterinary training. I hope you can use this information to think a little deeper about some of the proposals being put forth. Raw milk is not necessarily inadequate. Regulated milk is not necessarily better, but not getting sick and dying is priceless. I'm Dr. Nathan. Thanks for listening. I hope our discussions are valuable to you and aid in giving perspective. If you want to contact us, please reach out to theveterinarypodcast@gmail.com. You can find a complete list of the podcast episodes on SoundCloud. If you find this information helpful and want more content, please join our Patreon, patreon.com/theveterinarypodcast. And don't forget to follow our Facebook page, facebook.com/theveterinarypodcast. As always, thanks for listening, and I hope this information is helpful to you. If you do find it helpful, please like it, share it, so other people may find it helpful as well.